Hmm. Yeah, German violations of neutral rights. It doesn't say unrestricted, but trust me, that's what it is. There's no rules. You just off you go. So German submarines are trying to enact a blockade around Great Britain, uh, and neutral shipping going into the war zone is subject to attack. Of course, certainly British shipping is subject to attack. So the British are trying to keep us from trading with Germany. The Germans are trying to keep us from trading from Great Britain. The difference is in the way it's done. The British stop your ship, they'll confiscate your goods, they give you a receipt, and they say, we'll sort this out after the war. The way the Germans are doing it can get people killed. And so Wilson, because remember, he's the President of the United States, we're claiming a right to trade with countries at war. After some of these incidents, where ships are sunk, Wilson warns the Germans that they will be held to strict accountability if anything were to go wrong. Strict accountability. Well, something will go wrong. It involves the it's not HMS, RMS, Royal Mail Ship Lusitania, which is a British ship. There's a picture of a Lusitania here on this slide. It's a large passenger liner, kind of similar to the Titanic. Okay, it's a big ship. Now, Lusitania is slated to make a voyage from New York to Great Britain. The German government prints a warning in the New York newspaper saying, don't sail on the Lusitania. It's a British ship. It's sailing into a war zone. It could be attacked, and you have been warned. Americans, though, don't necessarily look at the newspaper for warnings from the German consulate before they head out on vacation. And so the Lusitania leaves New York, and almost before it gets to Great Britain, she is attacked and sunk by a German submarine. Next slide. I know that's irritating. Here's a newspaper from New York Times. It says here, Lusitania sunk by submarine. Probably 1,000 dead. Actually, more than that. It's an early headline. Twice torpedoed off the Irish coast. Or was she? Possibly only torpedoed once. Okay. There is speculation that the coal bunkers exploded. Okay. Sinks in 15 minutes. So good luck getting to the lifeboats, guys. Americans aboard include Vanderbilt, one of the rich folks, Froman, don't know anything about Froman. Washington believes a grave crisis is at hand. Yes, indeed, because a few hundred Americans have gone down with the Lusitania. This is a maritime disaster. It's right up there with the Titanic as far as loss of life. Except nobody ever made a movie about it with Jack and Rose. And you can read about this if you haven't already done so. It's the reading up on Canvas that goes with World War I. So you can go in there, and when I checked this morning, a handful of people had taken advantage of a break to get ahead and had done the reading. But if you haven't, you need to do this before the due date about what happened to Lusitania. So remember, I told you that Wilson had warned the Germans they would be held to strict accountability if anything were to go wrong. Well, something has gone terribly wrong. Wilson will, threaten to break off diplomatic relations with Germany, which is the last precursor towards war. If you stop talking to a country, it doesn't leave a lot of places to go. Okay? Now, the person in charge of sending snarky notes to other countries would be the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State at this time was our good friend William Jennings Bryan. I remember him, Mr. Cross of Gold, who had worked to help get Wilson elected and been given the job as Secretary of State. Now, Bryan thinks this is a bad idea, because here's the problem with giving an ultimatum. What if ever people refuse to accept it? Okay? Your parents come to you and say, if you don't clean up your room, you're grounded from your cell phone. And you say, I don't really need my cell phone. I can just read a book. Now what do they do? Well, they can take your cell phone. But you may call their bluff. Or you may say, oh, they won't really do that. Anyway, so once you issue an ultimatum, what do you do if the Germans refuse to stop unrestricted submarine warfare? Yeah. So Bryan, rather than get involved with this, will resign. He thinks that Wilson's playing a dangerous game, but he might be painting himself into a corner. But the Germans, who really don't want to annoy us too badly, go ahead and issue something called the Liner Pledge, saying they will not attack passenger liners. Okay? Now, so a few ships will maybe get through with some supplies, but they figure it's not worth worrying about it. So the Germans come out and say, we will not attack passenger liners. So it looks like Wilson might have won. Next slide. The Germans issue the Liner Pledge in September of 1915. Now the problem is, not all passenger liners are big, huge, giant ships like the Lusitania or the Titanic. Some are small. Here's one here in this picture. If you look at this picture, you'll notice there's a fellow in a rowboat right next to it, and a guy standing next to the ship. This is obviously not a very big ship, but it is a passenger ship. Trouble is, it looks a lot like a cargo ship if you look at it through a periscope. So, in May of 1916, a German submarine hits, I believe it was a French ship, I recall, called the Sussex. Okay, blows the front end off. Right? And although no Americans were involved in this, to the best of my knowledge, I think some people were killed, but the Germans have broken their liner pledge by attacking this liner, possibly innocently. Maybe they thought it was a cargo ship. And so Wilson's putting the pressure on the Germans again. So they come back with the Sussex Pledge. They say, we will not attack civilian ships at all. Okay? British Royal Navy warships, fair game. You can see, you know what they are when you see them through a periscope. They got guns all over them. You can tell a warship from a cargo ship. All right? So those would still be fair game. But the Germans say, we will not attack commercial civilian shipping. So it looks like Wilson has scored a win here. Right? But he's got the Germans to back down. The Germans have voluntarily tied the hands, like the visual aid there, tied the hands of their submarine fleet. Okay? Now, the problem is, what if later they decide that they need that asset working? Okay? What if they change their minds? But anyway, May 1916. 1916 is, guess what? We get every 4 years? Presidential election year. Right? Remember, Wilson had been elected in 1912 when he ran against Taft and Roosevelt and Eugene V. Debs, and it got into office with like 40% of a vote because it's a four-way race. Okay? So 1916 is an election year. Right? And Wilson, big surprise, is going to run for re-election. Now, he would like to run on his progressive achievements, which we talked about in the last lecture. Right? The Child Labor Act, the Federal Reserve Act, other things that they had accomplished were for the Federal Trade Commission. Anyway, this is kind of what he'd like to run on. But you kind of know he's going to be the candidate for the Democrats. So when they're having the convention, you're trying to drum up some support. There's no suspense. You already know who the nominee is going to be. It's the president. So somebody's speaking. We're talking about Wilson, and they're saying, well, he did this. Why we got the banking reform, and we got child labor taken care of, and we did this, and we did that, and we did this, and he kept us out of a war. We haven't gotten sucked into this European conflict. And that's what sticks. That's what a lot of people really focus in on, is that the United States has not gotten drawn into the World War. No one's calling it World War I at the time. It's a full World War. Right? Now Wilson realizes, though, that things could change, but right now he's managed to keep us out. Now, this is not on the PowerPoint. I'll insert this. There were people who were worried that if we did get involved in war, that the United States was really not ready for something like that. So something was going around the country in 1916 was something called the preparedness movement. There were a lot of people saying that we needed to step up our military readiness. We needed to build more ships. We needed to maybe enlarge the army. There was talk. Now, this never actually happened, but there was talk of universal military training. That would be where every young man, probably 18, I would guess, but I don't remember the exact proposal, would go into the army for basic training. Okay, so you would go do. So this is not compulsory service of like a year or two. It was just training, but you'd probably spend the summer basically in boot camp, learn the basics, and then you'll be released. This never actually happened, but there were people talking about it. Right? One of the big leaders of the preparedness movement, someone who could really sink his teeth into this kind of idea, was the former president, Theodore Roosevelt. Okay? He was a big advocate for upping the military readiness of the United States. And if I recall, Wilson was kind of okay with some of this. I mean, he doesn't want to seem as being weak on the military, and it's an election year, so he's kind of okay with some of this. And Congress at this time did pass a big naval appropriation spending bill that was going to greatly increase the size of the United States fleet. So they opened up the spigot and let money flow out to start building, a big building program to increase our number of battleships and other ships too. But battleships were the big power thing at the time. That's not particularly important for where we are right now, but it comes up later, so I'll mention it now. So, in 1916, let's go to the next slide.